Hello students, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today in this video, we are going to discuss about cardiac cycle. What is cardiac cycle? Cardiac cycle, my friends, refers to series of events occurring in heart, in order to pump blood out of heart. Okay, so cardiac cycle refers to series of events occurring in heart in order to pump blood out of heart. Understood? That is cardiac cycle. Now, let us see what are the different phases of cardiac cycle. But before that, I told you the definition of cardiac cycle, that cardiac cycle is nothing but a series of events. So there are some events which occur in the heart, and following these events, the heart is able to pump the blood out of it. Okay, so series of events occurring in heart in order to pump blood out of the heart. Okay, two different parts of body is known as cardiac cycle. Understood? Is known as cardiac cycle. So this is the definition of cardiac cycle. Now let us move on and see what are these different events which occur during cardiac cycle. Now I told you that cardiac cycle is a series of events after which the heart is able to pump blood out of it to different organs present in our body. Okay, so now I am going to tell you what are these events in series. Okay, so the first event which occurs during cardiac cycle is atrial depolarization. Okay, atrial depolarization. Under atrial depolarization, the atria of the heart, that is the right and the left atrium of the heart, the right and the left atrium contract. Okay, blood moves from atria to ventricles. So the blood from the left atrium moves to left ventricle, and the blood from the right atrium moves to the right ventricle. Okay, so there's a very basic concept we should know, that right side of the heart has deoxygenated blood, and left side of heart has oxygenated blood. Okay, so this is the basic concept one should know, and I guess this is very simple. The right atrium and the right ventricle have blood which is deoxygenated, because this blood is coming to the right atrium from different organs through superior and inferior vena cava. So the right atrium and the right ventricle are having deoxygenated blood because this blood is coming from different organs through superior and inferior vena cava, and the left atrium and the left ventricle have oxygenated blood because this blood is coming from the lungs through pulmonary veins. Okay, so this was about something basic you should know. So let us continue about the concept, that is blood in the atria during atrial contraction or atrial depolarization, which is also known as atrial contraction. which is also known as atrial contraction, or atrial systole. What it is known as? Atrial depolarization, atrial contraction, or atrial systole. Okay, I hope it's clear to all of you. Atrial depolarization, atrial systole, or contraction. Understood? Now see, blood from the atrium moves to blood from the ventricle during atrial contraction. Okay, so there is the atria and ventricle are separated from each other. Now you will ask me, ma'am, how is the blood moving from atria to ventricle? How is the blood moving from atria to ventricle? See, the atria and the ventricle are separated by atrioventricular septum. But in this septum, we have atrioventricular valve. We have atrioventricular valve, which is open during atrial systole, and from this atrioventricular valve, the blood present in the atria moves to the ventricle during atrial systole or atrial depolarization. Understood? So what is the first event? The first event is nothing but atrial depolarization, and the first event is nothing but atrial depolarization. The first event is nothing but atrial depolarization, and it occurs in the heart. Okay. So moving on to the second event. The second event is after atrial depolarization. The second event is ventricular depolarization or ventricular systole. Ventricular systole. Okay. Or ventricular contraction or ventricular depolarization. Okay. So now what happens during ventricular systole or depolarization? The ventricles have blood now. Okay. The ventricles have blood because just now the ventricles received blood from the atria. Just now the ventricles received blood from the atria during atrial depolarization. So now this blood which is present in the ventricles, this will move out of the ventricles. Okay, in two phases. Okay, so the first phase, so the first event of the cardiac cycle is atrial depolarization or atrial systole. The second event is ventricular systole or ventricular depolarization. Under ventricular systole, we have two parts, the two phases. The first phase is isovolumetric contraction. Okay, so first phase is isovolumetric contraction. The first phase is isovolumetric contraction and the second phase is ventricular ejection. Okay. So what happens during isovolumetric contraction? During isovolumetric contraction, the atrioventricular valves close. The volume of blood present in ventricles remain constant because see, ventricles have two valves. Okay, so the ventricles have two valves. Let us consider left ventricle. It has two valves. One is present between left atrium and the left ventricle, and one is present between the left ventricle and the aorta. Okay, so during isovolumetric contraction, the AV valves are closed aortic and pulmonary valves are also closed. Okay, they are also closed. So AV valves are closed. The volume of blood present in ventricles is constant. Aortic and pulmonary valves are closed. Pressure in the ventricles is not constant. It keeps on increasing. Okay, it keeps on increasing. So there are four things which occur during isovolumetric contraction during ventricular systole. The first thing is atrioventricular valves close. The aortic and pulmonary valves remain closed. The volume of blood present in the ventricles remain constant, and the pressure inside the ventricles increases. Now, because the pressure inside the ventricle keeps on increasing during isovolumetric contraction of ventricular systole, at some point the ventricles enter the second phase called as ventricular ejection. At some points, the ventricles enter the second phase called as ventricular ejection. Okay, during this phase, following things occur. AV valves remain closed. Okay. Atrioventricular valves remain closed. Aortic and pulmonary valves open. Aortic and pulmonary valves open. And the blood in the ventricles moves out of ventricles into aorta. Okay, just a second. Let me simplify it for you. Okay, so see, blood in left ventricle enters aorta. Blood in right ventricle enters pulmonary artery or pulmonary trunk. Okay, understood. So this is what happens during ventricular ejection phase of ventricular systole. And want to tell you one thing here, very important. At the end of atrial systole and at the starting of isovolumetric contraction, there is one very important thing occurring, which is closure of AV valves. And this closure of AV valves produces first heart sound, which is also known as lub. Understood? So this was very important thing. So this was about our second phase of cardiac cycle, ventricular systole or ventricular contraction or ventricular depolarization. Now moving on to third phase of cardiac cycle, which is ventricular relaxation. Or diastole or ventricular relaxation or ventricular diastole or ventricular repolarization. Understood? So during this phase like that of ventricular systole, this event of the cardiac cycle. Like that of ventricular systole has two phases. The first one is isovolumetric relaxation. The second one is ventricular filling. Okay, so let us see what happens during first phase of ventricular diastole. So during first phase, that is isovolumetric relaxation, the aortic and pulmonary valves close. Okay, and this, my friends, this happens at the start of ventricular relaxation. And this, my friends, produces second heart sound, produces second heart sound, which is known as dub, which is known as dub. Okay. So now, this is the first thing. The second thing which occurs during isovolumetric relaxation is, the second thing which occurs is the AV valves remain closed. So, the pressure, remember, this is very important, pressure in the atria keeps on increasing. Okay, because atria, what is happening is during ventricular relaxation, the atria are receiving blood from the body. Okay, I told you the left atrium receives blood from lungs through pulmonary veins, and the right atrium receives blood from different body parts through superior and inferior vena cava. So during ventricular relaxation, the atria are continuously receiving blood. Okay. So they are continuously getting filled. Because of that, there is increase in volume of atria. So now when the volume of atria is increasing, the pressure in atria also increases. So when pressure in atria increases, the atria wants to send this blood to the ventricle. But what is happening is the aortic and the pulmonary valves are closed during isovolumetric relaxation. Okay, now because the aortic and the pulmonary valves are closed and atria are continuously being filled with the blood through the superior vena cava and pulmonary veins, the pressure in the atria keeps increasing during ventricular relaxation, isovolumetric during ventricular relaxation or isovolumetric relaxation. Okay, isovolumetric relaxation. Relaxation. Now, this is what happens in isovolumetric relaxation of ventricles. Now, what happens during ventricular filling? Now, the first event which happens during ventricular filling, the early part is opening of AV valves. Okay, the second thing which occurs is the pressure, increase in pressure in atria. So, open AV valve. So why are AV valves opening? Because the pressure in the atria has now increased to such an extent कि भाई atria are telling अब तो बर्दाश्त नहीं होगा, तो valve खोलो, है ना? So अभी AV valves will open. After opening of AV valves, the blood from the atria enters ventricles. Okay, the blood from the atria enters ventricles. Understood? And this is known as ventricular filling or diastolic filling. 70% of the blood, listen to me very carefully, blood that is present in the ventricle. Okay, wait a second. So this is known as ventricular filling or diastolic filling, because this filling of the blood in ventricles is occurring during ventricular diastole. That is why diastolic filling. Now see, in a ventricle, 60% of blood, sorry, 70% of blood is present due to diastolic filling. What do I mean by this? That at the end of the atrial systole, whatever the amount of blood that is present in the ventricle, 70% of that blood is due to diastolic filling. Okay, and the rest 30% is filled during atrial systole. Okay, filled during atrial systole. Understood? So what happens is, at the end of atrial systole, whatever the blood that is present inside the ventricle, 70% of that blood is due to diastolic filling of the ventricles that occurs during ventricular diastole. Rest 30% of the blood inside the ventricles comes during the atrial systole. Okay, so at with diastolic filling, one cardiac cycle ends. Okay, and this, my friends, takes approximately 0.8 seconds. That's it. मतलब इतना कुछ सिर्फ 0.8 second में हो जाता है. Okay, now after this, another cardiac cycle will start with again first event, which is atrial systole. Okay, understood? So in 1 minute, our body performs 70 to 100 cardiac cycles. And this is nothing but heart rate. Okay, understood. So this was about the cardiac cycle. I hope this video was useful to you. If you liked it, do press the subscribe button and that bell icon also. It's free. And share with your friends. Till then, see you. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.